Hey everybody, welcome to the Kickstarter preview for Masters of Mutanite. This is coming from Knapsack Games, designed by Andrew Federspiel. And it's a 2 to 4 player deck building / skirmish style game. So the premise of the game is that some meteorites have fallen to Earth, and there's just been lots of mutations and transformations just all over the planet. And so players will be duking it out, kind of transforming and upgrading their characters and just doing combat and interacting with the environment, kind of like throwing cars and trucks and power lines and all kinds of crazy stuff, and sort of interacting with the environment as well as the other players, and then kind of mutating through the course of the game. So let's go down and I'll teach you how to play the game, and I'll come back and give you some of my thoughts. So before I show you the game, I want to just make a mention. Of course, this is prototype components and artwork, although it looks like the artwork's pretty close to being done. Here's a little bit of a better shot of the box cover. And then we'll take a look at the board, which I've set up here for a 2-player game. Now, the main player area is made up of the city here, and you can see we've got a couple of these tiles here off to the side. You can see these are for 3 and a 4 player and a 4-player game respectively, and the players are going to be moving around in these different zones. Now, you use specific zones based on the player count, but you will randomly organize these into different formations based on the player count as well. Now, each player is also going to get a little board or card like this that depicts their character, and you get a little standee like this which has their character artwork on it, and then you get a starting deck here. And everybody starts with the same starting deck, so you can see we've got a punch card, pickup, fling, as well as a cleanse card, and you've got some multiple copies of some of these cards. So you're going to start with these, and you can see I've started here ominous with the mutation of Frost Hands here. And if we zoom in, we can see the nice little player aid here. And just to kind of show you another character here, here's Adria, and she has, you can see, has the same board and configuration except for the starting trait. So what happens at the start of the game is you'll have this deck of traits or mutations, and each character can choose one of the 3 starting ones. So here Adria can get either telekinesis, which says once on your turn when you would throw something from any zone as if you were there. So you can throw stuff from different zones far away. You've got voodoo that you could choose. It says opponents take double damage from poison. That's what that icon means. And that includes gaining and drawing poison, which I'll show you in a minute. And then pyrokinesis, which is once on your turn, you may move a flame from one zone to another as a ranged attack, and I'll show you what that means. So you can choose and pick here. So maybe we'll say, hey, we're going to pick pyrokinesis in the case of Adria, so you can put that there or off to the side. And then you'll shuffle, each player will do this, will shuffle the other ones that weren't chosen back into the trait deck. So it's possible that another player might gain that trait over the course of the game, or you might. Now, the next thing to note about these boards here is you're going to set these up, like I said, randomly, and you're going to look at each zone, and you can see at the bottom of the zones, they're going to tell you 2 sort of environmental pieces that are going to go there. So in this case, we're going to have this kind of nuclear waste canister and then a little water tower. It could be something like an electrical pole, or it could be an ice cream truck, and all kinds of different stuff there. So that's going to tell you that. Then on the other side of the board, over here, you can see a slot here with this Mutanite gem. And then each of the boards has this little slot, and you're going to deal cards out of this main deck here of power cards, and then seed each board with one of these. And these are going to be cards and abilities and powers that the players can collect over the course of the game to add into the starting deck. And then you're going to randomly determine player order, and then in player order, players are going to take their figure and put it in one of the available empty zones that are out on the board. And it's worth noting at this point, the 2-player game and 3-player game basically play out the same with a little bit of a different board configuration. The 4-player game is meant to be played as teams, so 2 versus 2. So you'll kind of alternate placement and turns through the course of the game like that. And you can actually share health and so on, some other little minor rule changes for that team game. So to start the game, everybody draws up to 4 cards, and that's your hand size. And then the course of a turn is very, very simple. Basically 3 very simple steps. You're going to play the cards as you wish, and then you're possibly going to gain Mutanite, and then you're going to draw back up to 4 cards. And there's a nice little aid here on the 5 different status effects, and these are going to come into play, so I'll go over each of those. But a card can basically be played in one of 2 ways. You can play the card for its effect, and here you can do a punch And if you see this icon here, that's melee damage, so you have to be in the same zone to do that. Whereas if you played a card like the fling card here with this icon, that's ranged attack, and so you have to be in an adjacent zone to be able to do this ranged attack. You can't be in the same zone or more than one zone away, and that includes diagonals. But the other thing that you can do for the card, instead of doing what's on the card, and you can do this with any card, is you can play it to move one space. And again, you can move up, left, right, down, diagonal, just move one space next to where you're at. So you're either playing cards for their effect or for movement. So let's do a little bit of an example here. Well, one thing that you might want to do, especially early on, is play this pickup card. It says if there are no enemies in your zone, you can gain the card in it. So we can take here and add this card to our deck. It will go into our discard pile, which we can draw later. Now this is very similar to the punch card. See, it'll do 2 damage. It's a melee card, but it has a couple other different things about it. If it has this little kind of yellow burst with a shield, you can play this as a reaction card. So for example, here is the ninjutsu card, so you could play this one as a reaction ranged attack. Now you can play these reactions as a normal card, so if you draw them on your turn, you can play them as a normal ranged or melee attack, but these have the added kind of benefit of being able to play them as a reaction to your opponent's ranged attack, or in the case of this one, as your opponent's melee attack. And this one does 2 damage, but it also has the ability here, your target chooses and discards a card. So this can be kind of handy to sort of mess with their turn a little bit. So you can take and pick that one up. So we'll pick that up and we're playing this card. And then we've got this cleanse here that we've got in our hand, let's say. And this allows you to remove some kind of damaging effects, but it's the start of the game, so there's no reason to do that. So we're gonna just play this for its move. And we'll move Adria up here to interact with Ominous. And then let's say we also had a punch card in our hand like I showed you before. This will just do 2 melee damage straight to Ominous right there, because at the start of the game he's got no reactions or defense or anything. And you can see here each character has 50 health, and we're just going to take this slider and move it down 2 spots. Whenever you take damage, you slide that down. And of course the only player at the end of the game that doesn't hit 0 is going to be the winner. Everybody else gets removed as they take damage down to 0. Now that's 3 of the 4 cards that we drew. Let's say all we had left was a fling here. Well, there's a couple things we could do. We could play this to move out of the zone, maybe try to get away from his melee attacks. Because we can't use it for the ranged attack because it has to be someone that's in an adjacent zone, not in the same zone. But let's pretend, in this case, Adria at the beginning of the game chose telekinesis. This is once on your turn, when you would do a fling action, throw something from any zone as if you were there. So in this case, we could say, oh, we're going to go ahead and take, and instead of throwing something where we're at, we're going to take this tree here and then throw it as if we were here. And you can see this here will actually do 2 damage more to Ominous there. Now each of these different environmental pieces has different effects. So you can see here the tree just does straight damage. But if we throw the ice cream truck, that's not going to do any damage, but it's going to apply a frost effect. Or if we threw this water tower here, would do 2 damage, plus there'd be a water effect. And then also we have throw the car, it only does 1 damage, but it does a flame effect. There's the one that will do an electrical effect. And then finally the last one here is this poison effect, and we'll go through all of those. But first, let's look what happens once you're done playing cards and doing actions. So after you've played your cards, you're going to get +1 Mutanite for each empty slot. So basically for each card that you pick up, there's going to be an available slot. So you could on your turn run around and pick up a bunch of cards and not do any damage. So you're going to gain Mutanite for each one of those. So in this case we just did the 1, so we're going to gain 1 Mutanite. And then you're just going to draw back up to 4. And then these cards are going to replenish here. And so new powers will constantly be coming out in places on the board. Now it's worth knowing during this refresh step, you don't have to discard cards. If you want to hold on to a card for the next round, you can do that. But you can discard any cards that you want that you couldn't make use out of, and then draw back up to 4 cards there. And then after that, play will move clockwise around the table, and you keep going until there's only 1 character, or in the case of a 4-player game, 1 team left. Now let's talk about 2 more things here. We're going to talk about Mutanite and then some of these status effects. So Mutanite can be used in one of 2 different ways. So if you ever have 3 or more Mutanite, you can spend 3 of it. So let's say we get up to 3, we can immediately spend 3 of it, and then we're going to try to add new traits. So then we'll be able to draw the top 3 traits, choose one of them. So let's just choose Stunt Rider here. This says when you dash or when you move, bring a car or ice cream truck with you as a melee attack. So it's kind of like, you ride it into combat. So you can add that there. And then the other 2 you will put at the bottom of the trait deck. Now the other thing you can use Mutanite for is, let's say we've stored up a few, like so, and we have this card here, let's say pretends this heal card here. I'll show you another example as well. So normally you can play it, a player in your zone gains 3 life, so you can play that on your partner in a team game. But if you spend a Mutanite, you can get +2 life per water that's in the zone there. So you can spend Mutanite to beef these up. Or another example here would be a Frostbolt, like so. Typically you'll do 1 damage and then 1 frost effect. But if you spend a Mutanite, you can do an additional frost effect. So there's a little bit of a balancing act between, you know, getting new traits, which is a little bit random, and then possibly beefing up some of your cards and boosting them. Now let's go over the status effects. So fire is pretty simple. Fire will do 1 damage per fire in the zone. So let's look at an example. Now previously we looked at this example where we could maybe throw a car in here and it's going to do 1 damage plus a fire. So we're going to do the 1 damage to Ominous, and then we'll put a fire down, then we'll see how many fires are there. So it'll do 1 damage because there's 1 fire. If some other fire damage was caused on the zone, we would add a fire here, and then that would do 2 damage. So you just count up the number of fires, and it does that much additional damage above and beyond what other damage you might have caused. Now next is gain a poison card. So if you give somebody a poison card, then they will get this card. So when they gain it, when they take it, put it in their discard pile, they'll immediately take a damage. Then it's going to go into their deck. When they draw it back out of the deck, it says when you draw this card, take 1 damage, and then discard it and draw a new card. So it's not going to clog their deck up. It's just going to, as they chew through their deck, keep damaging them over and over and over again. The next one we'll look at is Frost. So when you do Frost damage to somebody, they'll take this card. This doesn't go in their deck, you just put it next to your board. It says when you receive this, you take 1 damage for each Frost you have. Similar to Fire, but it doesn't target an area, it targets a character. But it also says you cannot move diagonally, which will kind of hinder, you know, the tactics of a little bit of the game. So you don't want these to stack up too much either. And then next, we're going to do lightning damage, which will do 2 damage plus 1 per water. So if we had tossed this power line in here, that would do 2 damage to Ominous. But if there was some water already in here, like so, then we could throw this, it would do 2 plus 1 plus 1, so a total of 4 damage. Now the next status effects, while we're sitting here, we'll just look at water. So if you cast water or some water comes in there, maybe from a water tower, for when the water comes in here, you can, if you want, you don't have to do this, remove a fire from there, so the water will counteract the fire a little bit. And the reason you might do that maybe is to help a teammate out, but you might get also some other cards that interact more or less with kind of these different environmental effects. So you might want the board in a certain situation. Okay, so that is how you play the game. Again, players are going back and forth, adding new, more powerful cards to their deck, trying to do damage to your opponent, and then you keep going until all your opponents are at 0 health. Okay, so that's how you play Masters of Mutanite. So let me tell you a little bit more about the game, what it kind of feels like to play. Well, the main kind of takeaway for me is you have a real kind of balancing act between kind of the early game deck building and then switching to the bigger damage. Because at the beginning of the game, you might get a couple of punches, you know, 1Z, 2Z, 2 damage, 3 damage here and there. But then definitely as you start to acquire cards, and if you've spent the time kind of trying to acquire the right combination of cards that work well together, then you can really start having big turns where you're doing like 10 damage, 9, 10, 11 damage. And that's a lot. I mean, that would be a fifth of your total hit points if you did 10 damage, because everybody has the same 50 hit points. So it's a real kind of interesting balancing act, like a lot of deck builders, between kind of building that engine and then pivoting and then going in and trying to cash that engine in a lot of ways, but done through the guise here of a tactical skirmish game. So that's a real interesting kind of thing, and the game does play very quickly. I'm not sure if this time, it says 45 minutes on the box actually, and I would say definitely with a 2-player game, which is how I've been playing this, it can be much further under that. I think with the 4-player game, with you're doing a team game, you're going to have some kind of strategizing between the players. That'll add a little bit of time, but it might add a little bit more to the fun as well. But in a 2-player game, you can get this done in about 20 or 30 minutes pretty easily, especially as players kind of adapt and learn the game and kind of learn the cards and all that kind of stuff. You start to see, oh, okay, they're going to go and they're going to start really going for these big combos to try to really turn their engine up. So as you start to play the game, that playtime will definitely come down, I think. And so I think there's 2 sort of final points I want to make that kind of make this kind of set it apart from just any other kind of, you know, run-of-the-mill deck builder, so to speak. One is you kind of have the deck building of your own personal deck and the traits, which is a really interesting thing. But you also have kind of the deck building of the board. So as the kind of the objects and the environmental stuff starts to kind of pile up and move in different ways, you'll have kind of hot spots on the board where you don't really want to set foot in there because there's like 3 or 4 fires in there. So you know if somebody throws any kind of fire in there, you're immediately going to take that 3 or 4 damage. So it kind of creates a morphing tactical sort of thing on the board that will kind of inform all your decisions. So the board is going to kind of take some kind of an organic kind of shape, and then you kind of have to sort of compare and contrast that with what's going on in your deck, whether it's going to benefit you in some ways or is something you kind of want to avoid. So that's an interesting kind of, you know, twist on this genre. And the other thing is really kind of it's kind of a marriage of the theme and the mechanics, because like I said, this can be like a 20 to 30 minute game. So when you sit down to play this, the expectation I think should be that this is kind of like, some people call this like a super filler. And that's not really like a knock in any way, but it's kind of that perfect game where it's going to sit down, it's going to play quickly, and you're going to get it done, but it's going to have that kind of level of satisfaction when you're done with it, that you played like a full game, and not that you just play kind of a one-off, you know, 15-20 minute filler game. It's going to kind of feel like you played kind of sort of a main course style of game. And I think that's kind of a benefit to it, where you know, you can sit down and play this, and it has this kind of big, bombastic, almost like a Saturday morning cartoon kind of theme. It's got that sort of that Saturday morning kind of style epicness to it, where it's just big and crazy and wild, and you know, you're gonna find some kind of cool, new, interesting combination with the traits and the deck building and all that kind of stuff. But it's not gonna take you, you know, an hour or 2 hours to play it and kind of get to the fun part. You're just kind of immediately going to jump in, choose your trait. You know, you're going to see 6 cards out there or more with more players of like, okay, there's a couple of frost cards, I'm going to go after those, and then just start burning into your engine and kind of jump right into the fun and start smashing each other in the face. So it has that kind of, it's almost like a throwback kind of vibe to maybe like an 80s or 90s style board game, but obviously with really refined, you know, elegance out of the deck building and all that kind of stuff. So definitely take a look at the Kickstarter page. There'll be links to all that stuff below. Thanks for watching, and hope you enjoy the game. Thanks.